Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Alex Howard. So Alex used to run the Optimal Health Clinic, which had 1,000 patients at any one time. He's got a very strong psychology background, but interestingly also a business background. He started a number of successful businesses. I know him through Conscious Life, which is an online platform for a load of really big speakers and teachers. So he's got a sort of wealth of meeting different kinds of people. And his main interest at the moment seems to be how the rubber hits the road in daily life. So that's really, I guess, what we're going to talk a lot about today. So Alex, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Good to be here.
How did you get interested in the body? What was your route into the body and, health being one of your things?
I got interested in the body because my body stopped working. So when I was 15, I just turned 16, was diagnosed with ME chronic fatigue and spent 7 years pretty seriously unwell. The first 2 years at times housebound, at times even bedbound. Kind of reached a point of absolute desperation. I wouldn't say that I wanted to die. I'd just say that I couldn't see the path to continuing living the way that I was. I then spent the next 5 years, so from 18 till kind of 23, on a pretty crazy journey of health and healing. I read something like 500 books. I practiced hours of meditation yoga a day, saw over 50 different practitioners, and basically just my entire life, something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but my entire life became about recovering from this chronic illness. And when I did eventually recover from it, it then became my life's work to support others going through similar kinds of life challenges.
Great. So we hear this story with so many people, they have an injury, so they take up yoga, or they're crazy, so they take up psychology, or in your case, you're seriously unhealthy. So you really, really looked at it and became obsessed with it. I mean, health is not one of the main issues we cover on the show, but given your sort of range of holistic experience in the area, crude question, but kind of like what works? What keeps people healthy?
I think the way you have to look at it is, it's a bit of a cliche, but one man's medicine's another man's poison. The thing that's been so fascinating with the Optimal Health Clinic, and just as a slight correction, I do actually still have the overall leadership of the Optimal Health Clinic, so might make a few people nervous. Otherwise, to clarify that. But in terms of the kind of many ways the success of that approach was the recognition and definition of different subtypes, different stages, different systems, and the ways that different people are impacted in different ways. And so one very kind of easy example to give is looking at diet. And when the Optimal Health Clinic was first founded, I was working very closely with a nutritional therapist who I was also in a relationship with at that time. And she had spent the previous 2 or 3 years transitioning to an almost exclusively raw food diet. In fact, I think the only thing that she had that wasn't raw food was champagne. So it was like she was very committed, and that's a big thing to get to the point that you are.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
And then on the other side, I'd been vegetarian for 3 years as part of trying different things on my recovery path from ME chronic fatigue. And I then started exploring this would have been 2003 or so, some of the research around high protein diets, and had started eating a lot of animal protein. And it had a significant impact in both increasing the amount of my energy, but I think in many ways, more importantly, increasing the stability of my energy. And so we would have endless debates of throwing around research articles, backwards and forwards at each other. We would have endless, it's like politics. If you go deep enough into a position, you can find as much evidence as you need to defend that position. It just doesn't really make it right. So the thing that we discovered was ultimately that different people's bodies had fundamentally different needs. And I think when you look at any kind of health program, you have to be careful of the fact that you read a book on a particular approach, and normally the person promoting that approach is promoting it because it's the thing that helped them. Yeah. And often they've tried loads of things in the past that haven't helped them, They found the thing that has, and like someone that's kind of been reborn and discovered Jesus Christ, they want to turn the whole world to this thing that they've discovered, not because they're kind of, corrupting people or because they're wrong. They just are saying what they believe to be true. And probably the best recommendation I would give to people is don't get so focused on people's arguments, their evidence, on taking an identity of wanting to be somebody which follows a particular approach or whatever. Listen to your body. Your body knows what it needs. And if you're brave enough to try different approaches and have the courage to listen to what your body tells you, that is what's going to help you discover what ultimately is the things which are going to be the most supportive to you.
Yeah, so that individualized approach of listening into the body, which is a very embodied approach to health. And I've definitely found this with diet, kind of like tuning into my own body. And it's the same when people ask me, hey, Mark, can you recommend a good massage person in Brighton? And I'll say, well, what do you like? And what do you need? And what have you done before? And what have you tried that's worked and what hasn't worked? And do you like hard or soft? And do you want energetic or physical? Like I can't just tell people, like, go to this massage person because I like them. Like, it's kind of arrogant.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think we have to also, it's a shift, right, in terms of we live in a culture where people are used to going to a medical expert and that person holds all of the power. And one of the things that was was terrifying, and ultimately the thing that was most empowering for me was realizing that when you go and see an expert, be it a body worker, be it a nutritionist, be it a consultant or whatever, that you are going for that person's opinion, but ultimately you have to be the captain of the ship of your own body. And you have to weigh up different perspectives and different approaches and make the decisions which ultimately are right for you. And it's really interesting seeing kind of our parents' generation, how they go and see a kind of the GP, for example, and what the GP says is gospel. I go and see the GP, and if I don't agree with it, I go and get a second opinion, or I go and do a load of research, and I go back and I say, actually, this is how I see it, and it's a collaboration. And I think that is crucial in a world where information changes, and the average GP has had 2 hours training nutrition in their entire career. The guy that did the plumbing in our house knows more about nutrition than the average GP does.
Yeah, right. And I feel like there was a faith in the last generation. The doctors I know really hate the internet because they've had some of their sort of away, and that can go too far when everyone's an expert. But they just can't know about everything, to be fair to GPs. And you can really research a subject these days. And I think the key thing these days is to be discerning, because it's so difficult to know what's trash online and what isn't. And then also, to take that power back subjectively of like, okay, I'm not saying the experts are in charge. And, we find ourselves in this position with nutrition, with health, and also with spirituality. Like, it's not like everyone goes to the Church of England anymore, right? Like there's just a huge plethora, diversity of spiritual approaches and embodiment approaches out there. This kind of segues into our next topic, really. Like, you've run this organization, Conscious Life. How many people have you had on Conscious Life? Like, how many speakers now? I've been on it. Ken Wilber's been on it. God knows how many people have been on it. How many is it?
I think we've had about 150 different teachers. Wow. Some of the names people might recognize, apart from your good self, are people like Byron Katie, Marianne Williamson, David Data, and obviously you mentioned Ken. We're quite well known for, about 2 years ago, we produced a documentary series on Andrew Cohen and Enlighten Next, and the whole, people that don't know, he was a kind of spiritual teacher for about 30 years, where there were a number of books and kind of articles questioning whether it was a cult over a number of years. In fact, his own mother wrote a book exposing him called Mother of God. We ended up making a documentary series about that a couple of years ago, where we did in-depth interviews with him, a number of the critics. We had experts like Tami Simon, Roger Walsh. We've done some pretty fascinating things, and it's been fascinating as somebody who's been committed to their own kind of inner path for 20 years to have relationships and kind of collaborations with so many people. And it's been fascinating professionally and personally, that whole experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is one reason I want you on the show. I mean, you're a mate of mine, we get on well, but also like you've had, I think I'm almost gaining a similar one doing this podcast, but yours has been even wider than embodiment in the whole spirituality world as well. And it's a very unique perspective because you've met a lot of these big names up close and personal. You haven't just been to their workshops, you've done business with them, you've seen them in the coffee breaks, you've hung out with them, and you've also had a massive exposure to a huge range of their professional work as well. I know you're interested in the topic as well as just running a business doing it. I mean, I'm not going to ask you who your favorite was because obviously that's too crude a question. But how about this? What were some of the things that stood out in the teachers you most admired that you had on? Like, what were some of the things you thought, wow, that maybe it was integrity or energy, or like what was some of the standout features in some of the teachers?
The thing that's been really interesting for me was when I first started down the path of conscious life, which was about 4 years ago now, I went into that having been at that point on a kind of sincere path for 16 years, so a regular meditation practice for much of that time, well over a decade in the Diamond approach, which is a kind of path led by A.H. Almas, deep into the integral kind of path. So I kind of went in still not with the kind of idealizations of teachers that I think you have in the early years where you read a few books and you basically think that the teachers you're reading about are the next incarnation of the Buddha or Jesus Christ. So I'd seen enough and I'd been around enough that I didn't have those kind of early idolizations. But I still had a certain amount of, I was nervous the first time I met some big character. I was excited. I was a bit starstruck sometimes. It's amazing how quickly some of that changed. And it's a kind of the thing that's been a significant personal growth for me over that time is my measure of a person and a teacher has changed significantly.
Yeah. So what's your measure now? This is a great point.
Yeah. So my measure used to be the version of that person which I internalized based upon observing them and reading their teachings. Now my measure is how does that person actually live their life on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis? What are their relationships like with the people around them? So are they surrounded by people that idolize them and are yes people, or do they have people around them that are willing to challenge them on a regular basis?
Yeah.
How do they treat people they don't agree with? So, if they fall out with someone, how do they handle that? How do they approach money? So how do they handle negotiating a contract? What's their expectation? Are they interested in win-win, or do they just care about what they can get for themselves?
Yeah.
How are they when they come off stage after a long day and they're tired and grumpy? And how do they treat people when no one's looking?
Yes.
Those things have become far more important to me.
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
Finish what you're saying.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that what I've come to realize is that there are people which are excellent. They are charismatic and excellent public speakers. They are excellent at synthesizing information, ideas, and articulating those in a way which are very helpful to other people. That doesn't tell you very much about their own level of integration of the ideas that they're teaching. And that's not to say that all of these people are frauds. I've had some amazing experiences, and there are some incredible teachers that are out there. Yeah. And the fact is no one's perfect. And what that did for me, and what I've seen that do for some other people, is you move away from seeing, you normalize your expectation of what you think it actually means to be awake. So when you first start meditating, we have all kinds of ideas that we think that our mind should stop, or we should just have total bliss and quiet. And if we're not achieving that, we're doing it wrong. Yeah. And then you come to realize that the actual lived experience after several decades of meditation practice is sometimes you sit down and your mind doesn't shut up at all. Yeah. But you have a slightly different orientation and relationship to it and an ability to observe it rather than get sucked into it. And so my expectation of what I see in others as being awake and my own level of awareness and development is really right action is what actually matters. Whether you could be the most kind of the deepest contact with kind of causal consciousness possible and still be an absolute arsehole.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're awake? Not for me, it doesn't.
Yeah. So that's where shit gets real, isn't it? So I want to slow this down a little bit from London speed and just kind of underline some of those things you said, because I think they're really important. Like, so what I hear you talking about is really assessing character, and character comes out in action, in how they treat the people around them, in how they handle contracts with you. You know, I've always thought money was an interesting tantra, and you're dealing with contracts and finances and email lists and deals. And you know, that sometimes shows character better than the words someone can say. And I'm with you on this. I meet a lot of people who are not, I wouldn't say frauds, they're just charismatic and articulate. And I put myself in that category, hopefully. And it doesn't always mean that it's integrated into every aspect of their life. And that's also what impresses me about, say, Paul Linden, one of my teachers. I picked him as a teacher based as much on how he was with his kids, or how he was when we ordered a meal with the waitress, as I did on, you know, what he was teaching.
Right.
Can you tell us a couple of stories? You don't have to name names here, but sort of where you've seen this. You've told me a few behind the scenes before, where you've seen this gone right and where you've seen it gone wrong. Like where you've seen a teacher that you thought, wow, you know, even in the coffee breaks they were really cool, or you know, they're after the thing, even after 8 hours of filming, they were still polite to the girl at the front desk. Or where you've seen this go wrong, where you've said people have contracted in weird ways or been funny about, you know, money or whatever it was. But I'd love to hear, without naming names in negative, certainly, is there anyone that you thought, wow, that really stood out in the positive or the negative?
Yeah. Interestingly, when we made the How I Created a Cult documentary series, we had three experts in there, which were passing some comment on Andrew Cohen, but also comment on the wider issues that arise when you kind of go into a kind of narrative like that. And I very carefully chose those three people, because when you start having people commenting on cults, you need to be pretty confident that those people are not going to have some kind of sordid stories that are going to come out on there. So I chose the three of the people that I feel have, in my dealings with them, had the most integrity. And I can tell you a couple of stories that come from that. So one of those was a guy called Roger Walsh. And
it's my son. Not a lot of people know this.
So Roger Walsh is best known in the integral circles as Ken Wilber's kind of doctor stroke friend, and he appears in some of the books that Ken's written. He's obviously a teacher in his own right. So 2.5 years ago, myself and two or three of the team that we were working with, production team, went and interviewed Roger in his apartment, which was like, we were staying in San Francisco, maybe like a couple of hours, an hour and a half north of San Francisco. So we go there to do the filming, and Roger's a lovely guy, incredibly articulate and extremely knowledgeable, been around this stuff, you know, right back to the 60s and the kind of psychedelic kind of stuff that went on. And I think Roger must be in his kind of 70s now or something. And anyway, he takes us out for lunch at the place where he is, and insists on buying lunch, which is just interesting when he's the one giving the interview. You know, we owe him the favor. But the thing that really struck me was we finished the filming, and then we're packing up the stuff. And obviously you've got, you know, like 3 cameras and lights and all the kind of gear that he's got back down to the car. And he starts picking up the bags to help carry it. And I was like, no, Roger, that's fine. Thank you so much. No, it's fine. And he insists on helping us carry the gear to the car.
Yeah, he's a real gent, isn't he? He's a real. I met him at the Integral Conference and found him very warm and you know, in those small ways when he doesn't have to, kind of helping people out.
Right. No one's looking. We're not on stage. There's you know, he's done a great interview. We're already super grateful for his time and the contribution that he's given. And then when I wasn't there when we did the filming for How I Created a Cult, but apparently exactly the same thing happened. So it's little things like that, which are not that I think that everyone should be helping carry our crew's gear. There's just something about those little touches which tell you that someone is not on some kind of teacher trip. They're not in some, you know, and there have been other instances where people just being too busy to do that. And that it's a bit different. We're in his home and, you know, he's kind of
sure. I want to just plug his book, Essential Spirituality. If people out there are looking for a sort of guide of the various kinds of spiritual practice that exist, that's easy to read and not too esoteric, I really recommend that. I read his book about 10 years ago, and I found that very helpful when I was in the early stages of my own journey.
Right. And then Doshin Michael Nelson, who is a lineage, who's I think the future lineage holder of Jumpo Dennis Kelly, who, if anyone's read, it's a great book written by Keith Martin Smith called, look at my bookshelf, called Heart Blown Open.
Yeah.
Amazing story. So Doshin is kind of part of that kind of lineage.
Getting him on the show in the future.
Yeah, he's fantastic. So that the kind of story there is, when we were producing How I Created the Cult again, Andrew Cohen came to stay for a night as part of the kind of getting that contract in place and agreeing the terms of that. The next couple of days later, Doshin came to stay, and it's interesting, the kind of the contrast between that. But what was kind of fascinating was just he arrives at the house at like 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon, and I think we booked studio time at 5:00 or something. So we have a couple of hours, and I've got, at this point, I had two daughters, which must have been like 2 and 4 or 5 or something. And I kid you not, he's playing tag in the garden with the kids. He's then having his nails painted by my now 7-year-old daughter, who was probably 5 at the time. And just the way that he was, and then we go to the studio and we film, we come back and we have dinner in the house, dinner with my wife and I. Just the way that he was just so in the moment responsive to the experience that was happening. So in one moment, what's happening is there's a couple of kids that want to play and want to paint his nails. He's completely present to that. In the next moment, he's lobbing Zen koans at me on camera, and completely present to that. And the next moment, we're having dinner and my wife's feeling quite delicate around something, and he's completely holding and supportive of that.
Yeah, he's great.
That ability just to kind of be completely fluid and responsive to what's needed and what's appropriate, and meet it in a full-hearted way, to be able to hold the position of teacher when it's time to be teacher, but to hold the position of plaything for children when it's time to be plaything for children. So I found that very impressive, and deeply respect him. And just the third person that was in that was actually Tami Simon, who's the founder of Sounds True. And, we've done bits and pieces together, and I've just found her very clean, very generous, just very decent to deal with, which is interesting given that we are, at the time we first met, we were clearly a competitor that was kind of rising up in the ranks to potentially take a bit of their lunch. And rather than kind of be in any way protective, she was almost just like offering the plate over and saying, let's share the meal. So I also found that very impressive, and a sign of her own maturity, not just as a business person, but also as a human being.
That's great. I'm actually due to email her later, so that's good to hear.
So, in terms of the kind of negative stories, obviously I appreciate you not asking for names. There, some of the stories that I know are just too edgy to share with anyone, I think, because they're just kind of told in confidence. But I think what I will say is that there's been some interesting experiences that we've had with people that go on stage and talk about something, and then that very thing they talk about come off stage, and it's very clear that it's at least a working edge, if not something that is in their own shadow in terms of their own awareness. Yeah. And it's that thing that people teach what they most need to learn, and a lot of people get into this work because of their own dysfunction, like myself included, their own dysfunctions, their own issues in their own life. And you could argue that the average person that initially gets involved in this kind of work is probably suffering more and probably has more chinks in the armor than the average person, which is why they go looking for some answers to that. And it therefore isn't necessarily the case that all those people have seen all of their shadows and resolved all of those pieces. And the thing that always really scares me is when people get to a certain level of success in their career, and then it just becomes much more convenient to surround themselves by people that agree with them. And I think it's extremely important to have people around you, be it your intimate partner, be it your children, be it your business partners, be it your friends. But you need to have people that when you come off stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people that think you're God, that remind you that you're not.
Family are pretty good for that, I find. Yeah. My sort of general thing with my wife is that she will publicly support me always, but privately challenge me. And my family, certainly sisters and people like that, I find very, very good for this. They didn't give a shit that I'm being on a stage teaching 100 people when I go see my sister, And certainly I employ people with this in mind. Like one of my criteria for a EFC manager in body facilitator course is they're able to challenge me. So like it really has to become a criteria without sort of just being around argumentative people the whole time. And yeah, seems to me there's a sweet spot with everybody teaches what they need to learn. I'm a very heady person who's got into embodiment. And there's a point where you're out of integrity with that. And there's a point when you're on the right side of it. Do you know what I mean? Like you can be on a learning edge and still be not perfect with something, but you have to have a certain degree of competence, surely.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that scares me these days is how easy it is to go and do, some kind of very basic training. And then you have people which are far better at marketing themselves than they are actually delivering the thing that they're delivering. And so, and probably my news feed on Instagram and Facebook, I'm sure, is distorted just because of the kind of world I'm in. Yeah. But the amount of people which are pontificating out there as teachers, that if for all the challenges we might make towards medicine, like you, some of my actually very, very best friends are GPs. 7 years of training before you are even qualified, and that's just the beginning of what's expected in terms of your development. To then people that go and do a kind of weekend training course as a life coach or something, and then suddenly they're out there telling everyone how to live their lives. And I have a particular kind of edge with this because when I recovered from ME chronic fatigue, I wrote a book about that experience. This is back in September 2003 when it was published. And I spent the next couple of years doing all kinds of talks around, all primarily UK-based, but talks to kind of health groups and self-development groups. And I built a pretty significant audience. This was kind of pre-social media, certainly in terms of mass use of social media. And I was, I was a name on the speaking circuit. I ended up getting offered my own TV series on the BBC, on BBC Three. And at the kind of pinnacle of that, I ended up having a very significant personal meltdown, kind of financial and emotional meltdown in my life, and ended up backing away from being that kind of character and taking off what was almost a decade really apart from the work I was doing with ME chronic fatigue, not putting myself out there as a kind of broad teacher, because what I realized was I could speak very eloquently and with quite real sophistication on topics of relationships and family and career and business. The reality, though, was that I couldn't have a relationship longer than 3 months without it going wrong. Yeah. I had very difficult relationships with my own family. I was at one point $500,000 in debt in terms of my kind of business life, and not good debt, not like borrowing money to grow, but just kind of bad debt. And I kind of realized that I could teach it. I could talk a really good talk, but it was not integrated in my own life. And I think it's very tempting for someone to want to walk away from perhaps a corporate career where they're unhappy, or thinking their life would be so much more rich if they could do this stuff that they love as a career. And it's and then there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But people need to develop enough of their own kind of process to be able to do that in a way which is really sustainable for them and for the people that they work with. And one of the other kind of related challenges is if you go outside of the system, it's very difficult to get enough volume of clients to actually get the depth of experience you need to be effective. And so you have this kind of odd situation of people that are very motivated to do the work, have to over market themselves to try and get a few clients in the door. What they need to do is go into a few thousand hours of sessions with people and have that kind of time to mature in their own development. And we just seem to be in a period now where we have a huge amount of teachers, but we don't have enough. Yeah, we don't have enough, in my eyes, of people that really get to mature before they try and take that role.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's easy to jump in early, sometimes just for financial necessity. Do you know what I mean? There isn't the same structures that doctors have there. For me, it was like, when I started my business, I was like, well, I don't think I'm quite ready, but, you know, like I need to earn a living, and this is what I know, you know, and I'm going to jump in there and sort of, you know, I've seen it. For me, there's been a journey of sort of learning on the job, and I'd be very embarrassed by things I did 10 years ago. And, you know, even now, like something came back to me just yesterday from one of the first times I taught embodied yoga, and I phoned someone up and they said, oh, you know, someone was saying you were crap. And I said, well, when did they, you know, study with me? And it was 5 years ago. And I literally, when I was just prototyping embodied yoga, and, you know, for me, there's a way of sort of prototyping things, of saying, look, this is a work in progress. But even then, having done that, it still came back to me, you know, just 5 years later, like I was still crap at it. And then I guess the other one is limits of expertise. You know, like I've done some stuff on attraction, and someone was saying, well, you should do some stuff on relationship. And I'm like, well, no, because I've only known my wife a few years. Like we haven't proven that yet. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't get to, after 4 years, I don't think I get to speak on that. Give me another 10 years. And I'll, you know, if we're still married and going well, then maybe we'll add that to the workshop, you know? So there's something about knowing the limits of your expertise and what you're actually embodying, what you actually have integrity with.
I think that's right. And I think, you know, the kind of example that comes to mind is like the amount of people that approach me saying they want to look after social media for one of my businesses. And I go and look at their social media and they've got 300 followers, none of which seem like legitimate followers. Or
it's crazy.
They've got like 20,000 likes on Facebook, and then they have no engagement, which means they basically just bought the likes. And I'm just like, really? You're going to come and do something for me you've not managed to do for yourself? That's interesting.
But what about people like, because me and you both have some business skills, I think you more than me, but we both have some business skills that are unusual in this world. So you've started several successful businesses. I know you go out there, you've inspired me actually, you know, you go out there and you get, you know, not shareholders, but sponsorship and investment. And, you know, you're able to market things. You know, there are people who just have more skills like that. And in yoga, for example, I've seen a lot of people who were sort of reasonable yoga teachers, but they happen to have a marketing qualification. Or, you know, one of my students is just very good looking, and that's not her fault. So she does great. She does great on Instagram. She's an extremely good looking Russian girl in her late 20s. It's like she's always going to have more followers than me. And now, to her credit, she also takes great skill and great pride in what she does. And she's really studying with different spiritual teachers to up her game. You know, she's really sincere. She just happens to be fit as fuck. And it's just like if you happen to be attractive or good at marketing, like that's not your fault, right?
Yeah. You know, if, like looking at the business side, I got good at business by making a lot of mistakes. You know, I had some natural aptitude. I was quite good with numbers, and I understood human psychology, so I was quite good at some of the marketing pieces. But I've made some terrible business decisions over the years that have cost hundreds of thousands of pounds in kind of lessons, let's say. You know, in more recent years, you know, in the early years, I used to fund businesses by credit cards and bank loans, everything else. I stopped doing that, you know, a number of years ago. And these days, you know, I do have shareholders of my two kind of growth-focused businesses that I have. I've raised over £1.5 million investment the last few years. I have 75 different shareholders, and there's a whole process that goes into that. And I think one of the problems we had with pop psychology is people start to kind of, the teaching is you can do anything you set your mind to. Yeah. So it's this kind of assumption that we're playing on a level playing field. But I think that that's wrong. And I think most people are not able to go out and raise large amounts of money for their businesses because they don't think like that. They don't necessarily have the drive to go and do that. They're not willing to take the pressures and the responsibilities that go with having that many shareholders, but they potentially have other talents. And it's like, you know, when I was a kid, I loved playing football, but I was crap. And however much I might want to be a professional footballer, I had no chance. I was then played guitar in a punk rock band.
Talent exists.
And I was okay at the guitar, and I knew a few tricks that made me look like I was better than I actually was. But I couldn't. I was useless at singing. I was a rubbish songwriter. And however much I might have gone at it, my only chance of having a career in music would have been to be like the kind of rhythm guitarist or bass player with just a bunch of really talented people, where I got to be a kind of freeloader on someone else's kind of talents.
Yeah.
I think there's something around self-awareness which is absolutely crucial. And sometimes people can be overly negative about themselves, so they need an injection of confidence to recognize they are far more capable than they're giving themselves credit for. But I also see people going the other way these days, where people kind of have this illusion that anyone can be Richard Branson. Well, I consider myself a reasonably good, like a kind of, don't tell my investors this, but I consider myself a kind of B to B plus entrepreneur in the kind of the real marketplace of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, like I'm a C, and I'm a sort of C or a C minus, but that puts me into the upper leagues of people working with embodiment and spirituality.
Yeah, and totally. And you can be a C or a D and still earn, good money doing what you love and have significant impact in the world. Yes. It's the kind of, having spent time around billionaires and people which are, A stars or A pluses, whatever, on that scale, they just have different talents. They have different ways of seeing the world, of understanding things. And that self-awareness to be able to not make ourselves worse than we are,
yes,
but also not to delude ourselves, think we have talents that we don't have. It then helps us double down on the things that we really do have the most potential at.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be careful where it's very tempting to be told you can do anything, you can achieve anything. But to have the people around us and our own level of self-awareness to be able to know where we should be deploying our talents, and then to have the support to fully go after that.
Yeah, this isn't American summer camp. Not everyone's going to be a winner at everything. And yeah. I say to my students, like, let's keep with this analogy. I'm like, look, you need to be at least a D to earn a living. So if you're an E, I'll get you to a D. Now, if you're a D and you're earning a living, but you actually want to be kind of like a bit more out there in the world, like we can get you up to a C. And like I'm a C, I'm kind of getting my stuff out there in the world. But if I wanted to make a whole bunch more money with that and really be huge, I might have to study, and I could learn from you and other people and take courses. I might get up to a B. But I'm never going to be like a hedge fund manager, or a Tony Robbins who has this huge empire. It's just not me. And I feel like kind of, on the one hand, assessing ourselves accurately, and then B, kind of doing the necessary work if we want to nudge that up is important. But it's not for everyone, is it? It's not for everyone.
Well,
go on.
My next door, so I'm working from home. I work from home on Wednesdays. My next door neighbour, I'm sat in my office at the front of the house. I can see their front garden. My next door neighbour runs a fund, and he leaves the house before I'm even woken the first time by my children at 7:15.
Yeah. And
he gets home at kind of 7:30, 8 at night. So he's gone 14 hours before he even does stuff.
Yeah.
The guy is like a machine in terms of how hard he works. And then, last time I was chatting a few weeks ago, and he was saying, I'm terrified that I'm going to be replaced by AI in the next couple of years, because actually computer-driven investment is now starting to outperform individuals.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of recognition that the grass can look greener, but like even in Optimum Health Clinic, it's really interesting people's evolution from, we've got about 20 full-time practitioners that work in Optimum Health Clinic, and people can aspire to wanting to be the director of the department, or wanting to be the CEO or the business manager or whatever. But in terms of pure quality of life, like emotional satisfaction at the end of the day, I would say the practitioners probably have the best gig.
Yeah, right.
It's demanding and challenging, but they're doing the thing that they love day after day. And it's very easy to look up the ladder and think the view must be better up there.
Yes.
But that isn't necessarily always the case.
No. Someone just asked me, they said, this embodiment conference you're putting on looks fantastic. And are you going to do it in real life? And I said, no way. Because even though, I'm getting a lot from it and it's cool and it's putting me out there, I'm not a conference organizer, and I don't want to be. Like I've got someone to help with this, but it's pretty, I might do another online one in 2 years. And that's with it being a success, it's which it is, and it's great and people like it. But it's also like, that's not my calling in life, and it's not the most fun, for me, but it's something I want to do that enables me to do the things that I really want to do, which is teaching embodiment face to face. So that's how I look at it. There's things I love, and there's the things that enable me to do what I love that I'm just being a grown up around. And the other piece here is,
just to tell you a kind of interesting story on that. There's a guy who I used to know a little bit, who was around the Yes groups, the kind of Tony Robbins kind of crowd. We're probably going back to 2004, 2005. And he had a successful career as a professional, had his own business, was on the kind of leadership council for his kind of sector, was driving a fancy car, had a nice home, happily married, got really passionately into all the Tony Robbins stuff, and decided that he wanted to take the kind of Tony Robbins vibe to the country that he lived in. So he set up this big event, and he flew in Bob Geldof and a bunch of kind of big speakers. And I think he was expecting like 500 people, didn't hit the sales targets, remortgaged his house to fund, to kind of raise the money to book the venue and get the speakers, went bankrupt. His wife divorced him, and he ended up, still, I don't think he still recovered financially, 12 years later. So it's very easy to think, oh my God, it'd be amazing to go and do that. If we get back to what we were saying earlier in the conversation, that what I believe is most important is how someone lives their life day to day.
Yeah.
Very easy to think that you need to make a massive career change, or you need to to get this relationship that you want to be in, or having kids is going to, whatever it may be, there's the story that someone has that is what they need for their life to be happy. And those things may well be a source of joy and happiness, and they may well be things that someone should pursue. But it doesn't change the fact that right now, today, as each person walks through their life, there are moment by moment opportunities to make choices about what sort of person we are today in terms of how we live in the world. And how do we engage with people that have different political views? Does that mean that we just kind of stop being friends with those people on Facebook or start trolling them in comments? Does it mean that when we're walking down the street and it's a crap day and we're in a bad mood, and we get on the bus and someone bumps into us and we kind of turn around and give them a kind of nasty look? Like, how do we live life day to day, moment to moment? Because my observation is, on the other side of being a millionaire, on the other side of being happily married, on the other side of someone having, the career they've always dreamed of, you still have all the same challenges and struggles in your life, just in a different way. And the moment-to-moment, day-to-day choices is actually what shapes whether the world is a better place for you being in it or not.
Yeah, nice. And, other speakers have come on here and talked about the money shadow of alternative communities. I know you've had run-ins with speakers on the, again, without naming names, run-ins with speakers, there, and how they handle money. And the other big one that it seems to come up when people don't talk about much is with kids, right? And you sent me some interesting sort of questions on this before we came on. There was some discussion on Facebook about, who should have kids and who shouldn't, and whether it was a spiritual practice or not. I mean, that's another very day-to-day life thing. So I'd love to hear you talk about that a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting one. And it's like going back to what you were saying earlier about being careful not to talk on topics that you don't have the, in some ways, one should not talk about parenting until their children have all grown up and are law-abiding and good citizens that contribute towards society as well. But nonetheless, dare I take a step into this territory? So just as a kind of piece of context around this. So when I met my wife, my now wife, going back 8.5 years or something, I had been in an endless pattern of disastrous relationships and not managing a relationship for a number of years, more than 2 or 3 months, and normally it was just a few weeks. And I did some significant internal work and had some significant realizations along the way that meant that I managed to stay in a relationship. And the joke was that I always used to say to people, my God, if I could just be in a relationship for 3 months, it would be like my life's biggest accomplishment. So we got to 3 months, and then, going forward another kind of month or so, my wife started to feel kind of tired, started to have some strange symptoms. Obviously, having founded a clinic treating chronic fatigue in ME, I just assumed that she had some fatigue issues. cut a long story short, turned out that she was pregnant. With somewhat of a kind of miracle conception, given that we'd been pretty careful doing the usual things. That's another story for another day. And it turned out that the due date of our first daughter was exactly our 1-year anniversary. So if you back up, that means 3 months to the day that I'd managed to be in a relationship, my wife fell pregnant. And so the moral of the story is be careful what you wish for. Anyway, part of the context here as well is that I had been someone that said, I probably won't have kids, or if I have kids, I'll do it in my 40s when I'm kind of, completely made financially, don't need to worry about that, want to be a kind of present, attentive dad that's just kind of there all the time. And was very clear that I loved my, then girlfriend, and she was very clear with me at the beginning of the relationship. She left the relationship. She'd been with someone for a number of years who wouldn't commit to having children. And she said, look, I'm not saying I want to have kids with you, but I definitely want to have kids. And I'm now, whether she was probably 32 at the time, I'm not going to dick around with somebody, probably the word that she used, but much paraphrase, I'm not going to mess around with somebody who's not at least open to that as a possibility. So there I find myself in love with someone, she's pregnant, and we're having a baby. It wasn't a choice, and if I'd been allowed to have the choice, probably would have ruined that relationship, and probably would still be sat here childless. But as it happens, once we'd had one child, it then became clear we wanted to have a full family. So we now have 3 children, a puppy, and a hamster, and pretty classic.
Crazy. You didn't give birth to the hamster, though, right? I just want to double check. You've not got.
That's not something I feel comfortable talking about on the podcast. So there's a lot that I could say about it. I think one of the things that for me has been very interesting, just tracking my own self-development through that process, is prior to having children, I think like a lot of people that are very committed to their spiritual practice, I was going on, I think the year before we had Marley, our first daughter, I had been on, I think, 7 or 8 week-long retreats of, meditation, spiritual retreats of different sorts. I was in weekly therapy. I was meditating probably half an hour every morning, going to yoga 2-3 times a week, reading books. I was fully immersed in that world. And then suddenly you've got a kid and you've got more financial pressure, you're sleep deprived, you've got pressures on what's still a new relationship. And that initial swing from basically being able to do what I wanted, when I wanted, in the way that I wanted, to suddenly family becomes, more often than not, the choice of what's right for the family becomes the more mature choice than what's right for oneself. So going from having this significant focus on myself to suddenly this responsibility for this family system.
Well, we live in a selfish age, don't we? We live in an age where we just, me and my wife are going, can we be bothered to have kids? Because our life's kind of grey and we're kind of selfish and we're not sure we want to, we're not sure if we want to suffer that much and, put ourselves second for the next, 18 years or whatever. And there's a way in which I see children forces people to put themselves second, forces them into a service orientation, whether they like it or not, right?
That's right. And I would be of the school that would say there are a lot of people that have kids that probably shouldn't have kids.
Yeah.
People, if I was dictator of the world and my rule.
Alex Howard's eugenics program. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. This will get you in trouble.
I would be insisting on people doing a certain amount of self-development before having kids and doing some basic studying of child psychology and how to emotionally hold and be present to the needs of a child.
Like a driving test.
So like a
basic
exactly. Now, of course, there's a whole, in reality, that's a completely untenable way to approach the situation. But
letters of complaints coming in. Hey, just because I'm a terrible human being in bad health and abusive to all human beings, so probably will my kids, I want to have 10 kids. How dare you, Alex, say that I shouldn't?
That's right. And then, you look at, if anyone's seen the TV series like The Handmaid's Tale, or, you look at the impact in China, where I think they might have changed it more recently, but they certainly for a long time there's been a restriction on how many kids you can have. There's all kinds of other kind of shadow stuff that comes up. But really the point that I'm trying to make is that having children is one of the most difficult thing that you do. And yet, one of the things that I see in a lot of people that are sincere about a spiritual path is underneath all of that is a very deep search for meaning and purpose. People want to understand why they are here, what they exist to do. And what I'm about to say is very easy to kind of dismiss it as a kind of like, oh, well, that's just what people say when they have kids. But there is something very fundamental that happens in terms of your focus of what matters in life. And you're a bit like when you go through certain ceremonial transitions in life, like going to weddings, going to funerals, kind of going to graduation ceremonies, where there's a sense of almost, this is what humanity has done in some version for millennia, and you feel some kind of rightness and connection to that. So there is something that being a parent and being part of a functional family absolutely gives you that. Should you do it to get that feeling? Absolutely not. Should you do it because everyone else is doing it and you think you should be doing it? Absolutely not. But equally, we have, I think, a problem that, it sounds like you're a little bit like in the situation that I was before the decision was taken out of my control. That if you overthink it too much, who would ever sign up for something?
Oh, it's an insane job proposition. You couldn't. I saw someone writing the job description the other day.
Right. I saw that as well.
It's an insane proposition. No one would do it. So one take is that, it forces you to be selfless, and it's got this archetypal, I think it's a rite of passage in an age where people don't have a rite of passage quite often into a, full adulthood. I've certainly lived in cultures where you weren't considered a proper man until you've had children, and, there's some sort of sense of that. The other thing, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here because he pays well, is that I think you've all got Stockholm syndrome. I think you've all got massive cognitive dissonance. I think that's an incredibly hard thing, especially for people who are selfish and not used to doing anything hard. It's the first truly difficult thing many people have done in their life. And they go, oh my God, this is really hard. So therefore it must be worth it. It must be the ultimate spiritual practice. And there's an obnoxious entitlement to many people about how spiritual their children make them, and how I couldn't possibly understand, even though I've worked with 50,000 children and been massively in service in other areas, I couldn't possibly get it. So, parents are sort of scum around this issue. I know everyone's listening and they go, Mark's a terrible human being, and they're writing their letters of complaint. But, get over yourselves, parents, is what I have to say, just in devil's advocate to what you've just said.
Yeah, so I definitely am not on some kind of trip that thinks that everyone should become parents. In fact, I've got friends that had kids that I look at them and go, I think that was a poor choice for you and for your kids. But there's also, and I could make some kind of facetious comments about having 3 daughters and knowing that my old age is well taken care of because, when I'm in the old people's home, someone's going to come and visit.
Yeah.
But I think kind of more fundamentally than that, I don't think it is right for everyone. Yeah. But what I will say is I was absolutely clear it wasn't right for me. And it turns out that, and this may well be my Stockholm syndrome, but it turns out that for me, getting off the trip of the obsessiveness around my own spiritual development and my own self-importance to be kind of slammed back to, I can have a day where I go out and I absolutely kill it at the office and I come back and one of the kids is having a meltdown. Yeah. And all my wife really cares about is, can I be helpful in that moment in terms of soothing and calming the situation?
Yeah.
And something very humbling about that.
Yes.
But also in terms of my own relationships with my own history and my own self-development. So for example, I had quite a difficult childhood in quite a lot of ways. That's kind of beyond.
But before you go into your family stuff, I just want to underline here that, it seems to me that spiritual narcissism, it's still narcissism, like focusing on yourself, even if it's how can I be better, how can I be more spiritual, how can I develop myself, there's still a self-focus. And I feel like people to grow do need something bigger than themselves to be of service to. And that doesn't have to be children. That can be a cause, that could be a business, but you have to put yourself out of the center of the universe, right? Like that's the key piece.
I think that is absolutely correct. And I think to kind of develop on that, like if I look, for example, at my relationship to my own mother, for example, my mother was a single mother for the first 7 years of my life. She worked 3 jobs. I had all kinds of story. Actually, a lot of the story came from doing therapy and was unhelpfully stirred through the therapeutic process of blaming my mother or my grandmother and various people in my life for the struggles and the dysfunctions that I had. no amount of self-development really progressed those issues until I had kids. And I discovered how challenging it was. And I discovered an unbelievable gratitude for my own mother and recognition that, oh my God, this is challenging enough in a loving marriage with a wife that's done a lot of self-development work, who also happens to be a psychotherapist specializing in adolescence, that even then, between all of the work that we've done, it's still difficult. It's like, how the fuck did my mother survive on her own with great financial stress and without any real support, mourning the loss of her own marriage and the destructive way that collapsed and fell apart? It's like, in terms of just shifting, and then of course that shifts my whole narrative of my childhood, how I identify myself, how I see my own kind of neediness in the world. So there's something about, whether it's through having children or not, it's getting out of that sense of oneself, as you put it, being the center of the universe, but also the recognition that spiritual practice done wrong leads us feeling more narcissistic, more entitled, more special.
Yeah, superior feeling.
That generally will lead to more suffering and more distance from that which is ultimately going to nourish and satisfy us.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex, we need to wrap up soon, which is a shame because it's such juicy stuff. And, you know, like, I think you can tell a lot by a person's relationship to their family. Now, assuming they don't have, you know, massive, I don't know, sexually abusive parents or something, like for me, it really shows something how people get on with their mums and dads, or even the memory of their mums and dads. You know, is their basic gratitude, even though that person was, of course, imperfect, you know, which is how I, you know, view my memory of my dad, for example, you know, and there's a certain being at peace with one's parents, which I think is part of being an adult, is going, you know what, I kind of get it. And that must have been hard. And relationships are difficult. Oh, shit, raising kids is difficult. You know, they're doing the best they can. And there's a maturity in that, isn't there, which I think shows up in other areas.
I think so. Just one final comment on that. I absolutely support in psychotherapeutic work. Often we need to go through a period of feeling our hatred and our rage and the frustration we experienced through not having certain needs met. That can be very, very important psychological work. The problem is when the therapists themselves haven't really resolved their own issues with their own parents, and they basically leave us there thinking that feeling that is the end point, whereas actually that is a step towards ultimately coming to a place of actual forgiveness. And that doesn't mean you're going to have that person necessarily in your life. You may choose to keep some quite firm boundaries with that person, but the person that version of them you carry inside of you needs to move beyond either shut down into hatred and rage or whatever, but ultimately that shouldn't be the end point.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And given that we've both had mothers who are therapists, I think we've done very well, Alex. And, you know, we should give ourselves some credit there for, obviously, you know, the children of psychotherapists are alwa's fucked up. So
my mother wasn't a psychotherapist. My wife is a psychotherapist.
Your wife is a psychotherapist.
It's my children that are going to be fucked up by the sounds of it.
They're going to be lawyers and bankers. Don't worry. So, yeah, it's all good. Listen, we need to wrap this up. So where can people find out more about you and your stuff, Alex? What's the best place to go to?
I'm the world's worst self-promoter. It's something that I am working on. Don't even have my own website. People can find out about Conscious Life at consciouslife.com. They can find out about the Optimum Health Clinic at theoptimumhealthclinic.com. I do have a Facebook page. I think it's Alex Howard UK, which I've started using for some work stuff. No, it's Alex Howard, facebook.com/Alex Howard TV. So I've started putting some stuff on there on Instagram a bit more recently.
Is that optimalhealth.co.uk rather than .com?
It's theoptimumhealthclinic.com.
Some other usurper. Oh my God, with a single name. Health Clinic. I just want to make sure I got the right one and share the right one. I was looking at the other one before. Okay, good stuff. Alex, final message about the body for listeners.
Final message about the body. I think my final message is a message around how do you not just focus on your body and what feels good to your body? How do you focus on how your body coexists in a world of a lot of other bodies? And are you contributing to the betterment of how others feel, or are you just focused on how it feels in your body?
Nice. Love it. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. More than I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.